Salutations! Dreamforge here with another build guide for Battle Brothers. Today I want to introduce the Paladin. So the Paladin is basically your very heavy tank. He is the one who's standing in the front and holding back chosen orc warriors or everything that you don't want to deal at that moment. He's basically your tank. Skill points. How would you skill your tank? Your main focus is that you want to make him as survivable as possible, so we take a lot of defensive traits. Just a small note at the side here, you don't want to take your tank directly from level 1 into the front line. You have soldiers for that, or cutthroats or whatever. You basically want to keep him in the back line until he hits a certain degree of survivability. I would say a very good indicator when you can take him into the front line is either Underdog or Battleforge. But I just go over the skill points, how I would skill him. I basically always go with this, like Colossus, surely, and then probably Gifted. And then you kind of have to make a decision. Is this very safe? Do I have a very strong front line? Maybe he just runs with it, he doesn't have to do a lot. Then I would just take Student. If you take it or not, it doesn't really matter. Then afterwards I would just take this, Shield Expert. This is of course something a tank wanna have. Not only makes your shields more survivable, gives you somewhat control, knocking enemies back out of dangerous situations basically. And then of course Underdog, it is a tank, he will probably always fight more than one foe, so this will have value basically always. And then Battleforge, he will wear the heaviest armor you can find, and then the Battleforge just makes sense, so you just get less damage. And then this is something this tank always want to have is an Indom. You want to use a tank that can just stand there and then tank the hits and not get stunned or thrown around. So you want to make him very reliable, and therefore you just give him Indom, he becomes immune to that. Yeah, other than that, I think it's very important that he has Recover. You don't have to take this very early. I would say around level 8, 9, 10, maybe even later, maybe even the last perk, because spamming Indom all the time is pretty intensive when it comes to fatigue. And this is something you really need, a lot of fatigue. And what you always want to have on top of that is Brawny, because this fatigue is very, very precious, obviously, and he wears the heaviest armor possible. And what I always take is Steel Bow, because sometimes you get very unlucky and you get this chosen axe right into your face and your tank dies very fast. So you want to prevent those critical headshots with tanks because they get hit a lot. And this is always a dice roll you don't want to risk, in my opinion. Alright, this is, I would say, what you always have to have. And now we have one point that is a freebie, I would say. This is kind of how you play with it. Are you one like me? I would take Taunt because my tanks are always kind of near to my dudes, so I can control the battlefield with them, binding enemies, taunting, or kick people back with like Shield Expert or this knockback effect of that shield. This is how I use him. But there are some people, they basically move their normal people back, then they move their two tanks forward, like I don't know, 3 or 4 tiles, and then they bind their basically 4 or 5 enemies. They just stand around him and hit him. And then Lone Wolf is obviously a very, very strong perk, because this increases your melee defense, and therefore you never get hit, or I would say pretty rarely. But let's say you have a Paladin, he's kind of fine, but his resolve is really bad. Then you kind of have to patch him up. You should take Fortified Mind. This kind of fits the theme. I mean, it's a Paladin, right? Like a holy warrior. Somebody is devoted to a higher cause, I guess. This is a patch-up perk. You sometimes would actually take this. I'm not a big fan. I would just take the farm hand, right? That has a lot of fatigue, and would avoid that, because this is actually very handy. That saves sometimes a life. Bro, this is very good when you wanna dagger down an enemy. You can focus that enemy on the tank, and the other ones can just dagger, and they don't really have to worry that much. This is just like a very useful tool. What you also can do, and this is just the last thing I will share, this is for late game. We're talking 25-30 chosen camps. So they will smash your shields a lot, like a lot. You have 3 shields, but they are broken all. You're not done clearing the rest of the camp. Sometimes this actually can take a long time. And what you also can do, and therefore then you probably really should use this lone wolf, and then you take Wax and Belt. This is only for a very high quality bro. Like a one who has maximum fatigue, has 3 stars in it, and can just push through, has very high melee attack. Maybe it's a max roll thief with the best stats ever. This is for rare situations where you really need somebody who holds back the biggest threats. And then you would actually equip 2 shields more, and you then you have 5 shields they have to punch through until they basically can kill you. And this should give you sufficient time to deal with the rest. Right? If this is not enough, then there's something wrong with your setup. Maybe you don't have enough damage, or your bros don't hit, or you just get unlucky. I mean, this happens sometimes too, right? But I just go back quickly how I would build him, because I play a lot of Origins with low bonds, and they really need gifted. I think this is a very important thing. I think this is absolutely fine, and the Paladin works really well like this. Again, I have always at least 2 of them. Gear-wise, this is kind of an early game. Very early on, he has enough to fatigue that he actually can hit like sometimes an enemy, and you don't level melee attack with tanks at all. I will show this in a bit. So you kind of want to use spears. If he has like bad fatigue, then you would maybe use a goblin spear. They're not that heavy. I think that's just -4, but this is not like the biggest deal. In the end, he should just stand there and dodge attacks or block attacks. I like to give my tanks in the beginning daggers, so they can help dagger people. This is how an endgame tank would look like. At some point, you really want to go south and collect those zipper shields. They are extremely durable. They're very versatile. They're kind of heavy, but you really wanna have them, because those wooden shields, they are not sufficient at some point. They just get smacked on, and they are way more durable, and they give even like higher bonuses when it comes to defending, right? At that point, I almost always use a dagger. Any weapon would just give me less fatigue, and his melee attack is probably around 50 if you're lucky. And then of course, this is like the heaviest normal armor attachment you could put on. Famed armor, sure, but this is just kind of how a baseline tank could look like. You want to have, if you can do that, somewhat of a resolve. It shouldn't be too low. I would actually aim for 45, 50 even. And this of course helps with that. You can craft that relatively early, and this is basically 1 level worth of skill when it comes to resolve. I just added a small section here because I got a question, I think it was like a couple days ago. What do people actually do with decayed armor? Because when you really look at it, decayed armor is pretty bad. It's pretty heavy for what it does. Or you could say at some point, let's say it's middle game, you smacking raiders all day, and then there's like an undead camp that has like 2 fallen heroes. You just take this, you beat them, and then you got, I don't know, 2 decayed helmets, 1 or 2 decayed chest plates. You don't want to put them on your normal fighters. They are really heavy. But your tanks, they basically only move and are there to get hit. And the protection is actually very good. I just showed this. You can basically slap almost anything on the tank. You can even use heater shields in the beginning. They're actually absolutely fine too. Just take what you have. You don't have to buy anything or go out of your way. But if you find those, they are obviously better than this, but they are worse than this. This could be like some sort of like a transition phase where tanks get really tanky. So stat-wise, you want to have a lot of HP. That bro really should have a pretty high roll when it comes to HP. He should have at least 1 or 2 stars here, the same with this. And melee defense is absolutely key. You really want to have a lot of melee defense later on, because they're really standing there and they're getting hit multiple turns by 2, 3, 4 enemies, and of course you wanna try to block that. I think a decent paladin is just almost any background that has a lot of fatigue. I would say, like decent stat when it comes to melee defense. So anyone who has maybe sure footing or max road melee defense like 5 and has stars in it is kind of suited as long the other stats match. You don't want to have a tank that starts with like 20 resolve or something. They always should have, I would say, kind of 40 in a way. So very, very high rolled Farman, for example. Militiamen are good. Yeah, the secret ones, the really good ones are peddlers. They can roll melee defense kind of high, and thieves. Believe it or not, you can have a thief that start with like 17 melee defense and maybe even 3 stars. This is absolutely insane. You will not have as high of fatigue as other origins, but they are most of the time pretty cheap. They roll consistently higher than almost every other origin. You basically level melee defense no matter what basically, and then fatigue and HP. And sometime, let's say you have only plus 2 HP, but his resolve is just 40, but you get I don't know, a 4 or 5 resolve roll because he has stars, right? Then you would take that. You really want to aim for, I would say, 50. He shouldn't be too low. Anyways, maybe you have a better idea to build him. Maybe you think that you would actually do this because you like this more, or you just have a completely different mindset when it comes to building a paladin or a tank. Then just let me know in the comments. I always looking forward to improve builds that I use and provide just better builds that are more thought out. So that's it for me. That was the Paladin guide for Battle Brothers. I hope you enjoy this build as I do and use it to very high degrees of success. This build absolutely works on the highest difficulties. I wish everyone a great day. Have a good one. I see you in the next one.